to Humanities on the Road. Today we are at historic Belmont Mansion in Philadelphia for My Name is Oney Judge with historian Diane Turner. And I'm Tracy Matisak. You know, Humanities on the Road is a collaboration between the Pennsylvania Humanities Council and the Pennsylvania Cable Network. The idea is to bring together people from all across Pennsylvania to talk about history and the arts and the important ideas that shape our world. We want to extend special thanks today to our host, Belmont Mansion. You know, this mansion was built in the early 18th century, and it is one of the finest examples of Palladian architecture in the United States. The American Women's Heritage Society, which is a nonprofit historic preservation organization, was founded in 1986 with the goal of preserving and maintaining Belmont Mansion. This mansion, of course, is dedicated to exploring the rich history that's been uncovered about the mansion and also about its colonial owner, the Judge Richard Peters, and about the connections that each of them had to Philadelphia's anti-slavery and abolitionist activities. The mansion, by the way, is a local site on the state's Quest for Freedom network, partnering with the Greater Philadelphia Tourism and Marketing Corporation's regional programming on the Underground Railroad. Well, at this time, I'd like to introduce Audrey Johnson Thornton, who is the president and founder of the American Women's Heritage Society, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what Belmont Mansion is doing to educate young people about the history of slavery. Welcome, Miss Audrey. Glad you're here.
Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure, and always to talk about our programs that we are working with our young people. We have adopted two schools, the Global Leadership, which is a school here in Philadelphia, and the School of the Future, where we train young people to become docents. That is volunteers to teach them about the history of the mansion and to become tours for our guides for our tourists who come from all over the world to visit Belmont Mansion. So we're very proud of what we have done. This is our fourth year that we have with this program, and we will be doing for the first time a summer camp docent training program for 2 weeks, where we will be dealing with this whole aspect of history. They will go on tours as well as learn about the mansion.
Miss Audrey, why is it important for young people to know the history of slavery in America?
Well, it's like any other nationality. You got to know where you came from to be able to know where you're going. And we found that so many of our young people do not know their history. And so this has done that, and we're very proud of what we have done. This is our 24th year here. We will be celebrating 25 years next year. And to think that we discovered 8 years ago that Belmont Mansion was a connection to the Underground Railroad. And that was done through a student from Temple University who decided to do her doctoral thesis on Belmont. When she did, she discovered Cornelia Wells, who was the slave girl who lived here, and found out that Judge Richard Peters, who were the owners of Belmont Mansion from Liverpool, England, he was also secretary to George Washington, Secretary of State, and they bought Cornelia. And from there, the history books opened. The Smithsonian, all across the country, people began to really look at Belmont and discover what went on. So we have been documenting this information. I wrote a book called The Crown Jewel of Fairmount Park, which helps to tell some of this history. So it's been very exciting for all of us. Philadelphia has become very, very excited over what we have discovered here in the park. Out of 49 houses, we're the only African-American group of women who maintain a historic house in the park. So it's wonderful.
Well, Ms. Audrey, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And you know, working with youth is really just a part of what happens here, as Ms. Audrey indicated. This historic site is an important interpretive and educational center for American history and culture. Well, let me tell you a little bit about our speaker today. Diane Turner is a Commonwealth speaker with the Pennsylvania Humanities Council. She is very honored as a woman to be the first curator after the founder of the Charles L. Blockson Afro-American Collection at Temple University. She serves as course director for the Bard College Clemente course in the Humanities, sponsored by the Mid-Atlantic Regional Center for the Humanities at Rutgers University. And that's an innovative program that serves as a bridge for those who are interested in pursuing careers at the university and college level, and particularly for low-income students. She is the author of My Name is Oney Judge, her first children's book, and also of Feeding the Soul, Black Music, Black Thought, and articles and interviews related to African American history and culture. Diane holds her bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees from Temple University, and she's going to tell us about her discovery of Oney Judge and how Oney Judge was a young African American woman who liberated herself from slavery, and why that's a story that everyone should know. Diane is going to answer our questions, and our audience will share their thoughts as well. So please join me as we give Diane Turner a warm welcome.
First of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about how I discovered Oney Judge. I was invited by a woman by the name of Alice Dommert, who has an exhibition development firm here in Philadelphia called Dommert and Phillips. She invited me to serve as curator for their team when they were going to submit a proposal for the President's House at 6th and Market Street. At that time, when I joined the team, we found out that our team was one of the 6 finalists, semifinalists for the project. I discovered Oney Judge while I was doing the research on the President's House. And I read a novel by a woman by the name of Anne Rinaldi. And I found it disturbing in some aspect because in the book, it stated that Oney was uncertain about her choice to liberate herself. And I was actually working on another project at the time, and next thing I knew, I was writing down this text, and it said, "My name is Oney Judge. I took my freedom all my life. I hungered for freedom. One day I took it. This is my story." And so before I knew it, I had written this whole text about Oney Judge. And once I did this, I contacted Cal Massey, who's a wonderful artist. The reason why I contacted him was because in terms of Oney, I wanted an elder in African American art to think about creating these images of her because I thought she was so important. And so when I contacted Mr. Massey, I was very familiar with his his work, but I didn't know him personally. So I called him on the phone. He said, "Come on up to my house, bring the text." So I went up to his house and I left him with the text. A day later, he called me and he said, "I'll do it." And so that's how I ended up with Cal Massey. I just want to show you when he finally finished the renditions and I came back to his home, it brought tears to my eyes because he had given me so much more than I had anticipated. You can see the cover of the book. And on the cover, you'll see Carpenter's Hall, and the clothing is actually the clothing for this period. What he did was change the colors because it was a children's book. But one of the things I didn't mention about Mr. Massey is the fact that prior to retiring, he worked at the Franklin Mint. And so he was very familiar with renderings of clothing and everything during that period. And so through Mr. Massey, I then submitted the illustrations and the text to Third World Press, and they decided that they would publish the book. One of the things that is so important to me about Ona Judge and her story that I felt was very significant is the fact that here is this African-American young woman here in Philadelphia, and that she had the courage to liberate herself. And when you look at her story in the context of the times, the way she viewed herself was very different from those who held her in bondage. But during that period, it was against the law for people of African descent who were enslaved to liberate themselves. And there were consequences for doing that. And more importantly, she was the first to escape from the president's house. Oftentimes, there is an emphasis placed on Hercules, who was George Washington's cook. But Oney escaped before Hercules. And so I thought it was very important to bring out her story because she had been lost in the historical record. One of the questions that came to mind, and people have asked me, is why did I select Oney in first person? And that's the way it came to me. I'm not a poet, I'm a historian, but when I wrote her story, it just amazed me. I didn't really have to think about it. I just sat down and started writing this text. And then later on, I went back and filled in the historical record and got more details about her. Another part of it is the fact that she ran away. And that's important, I believe, because often people don't realize that running away happened every day during the period of slavery. It was a major form of resistance to slavery, and that Oney was one of thousands of enslaved Africans who liberated themselves, and I'm just very happy to be able to tell her story. Another part is the fact that oftentimes in the narrative, what got lost about Oney and everything that I read was the fact that she was not a slave. I mean, she was labeled as a slave, but she really wasn't. She was an enslaved African, and she had the same desires as anyone else, free. And so to be able to give the narrative in first person and tell her story that, you know, this was a conscious choice that she made to liberate herself. She understood what she was doing, and she understood the consequences too. But the desire for freedom was much greater than anything else. And also to open up dialogue around African resistance to slavery. Oftentimes we just talk about the Underground Railroad, which was really part of running away. But here you have Oney escaping from slavery before the official Underground Railroad. And this was occurring all along. And there also that there were other forms of resistance to slavery: cultural resistance, day-to-day resistance, abolitionism, immigrationism, and also armed struggle that occurred. And that these Africans were not on the peripheral of the struggle against slavery, that they were right in the center. And that, I think, is important for young people to understand, that they were actors and not passive in the process. And that the story, Oney Judge's story, is one of many, but a great experiment at looking at explorations in American freedom.
Thank you so much, Diane. What a beautiful book and story. And we've got Miss Audrey with us to lead us off with a question for you.
Yes, I agree. What a magnificent story. I'm going to ask you about Oney Judge. Who was she enslaved to?
Oney Judge was born around 1774, and she was the enslaved African of